Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here with a pretty special Yo Video Games video for today, and that is because I actually got to go hands-on recently with Final Fantasy XVI. Square Enix invited me and Max to go to a little play session, and we got to go check it out. We got to check out pretty much every single demo that's been shown or exhibited, all the way up to May, and all the way to before that. So we kind of got to go real hands-on. We got to play for a very long time. This was a not a short little thing. This was not a E3 15-minute, wham bam, thank you, ma'am, one and done kind of thing. We got to actually sit and vegetate and just absorb Final Fantasy 16, in all its glory. In multiple incarnations and demos for a very, very long time. And they actually, wanted us to give our initial thoughts and impressions. Now, the only thing is that there was no capture at this little event, so all the footage is provided by Square Enix. So you're not seeing what I did necessarily, but you are seeing what I played. The same demo, the same area, the same stuff. Just this is not me playing. This is footage provided to us by Square Enix. Anyway, so without further ado, let's jump right into Final Fantasy 16. Now, if you've been following me personally on my streams or on my channel, you know I've actually been pretty up on this game. I don't even play 14. I don't know much about it, but I did always feel this game is going to be good. This is going to be really good. Why? Because, well, the team behind it seems to really know what they're doing. Obviously, this is a part of Creative Business Unit 3. They are obviously Final Fantasy 14 people, and a lot of people who worked on Heaven's Word, moved over and worked on this game. And then they brought in new people, of course, too, including the combat designer for Devil May Cry 5 from Capcom. So what we got here is, obviously going to be a very action-heavy Final Fantasy. But I've always been very excited because I'm like, you know what, this is going to be good. This is people who are really good at their job. They know what they're doing, and they went out and got like really good creative talent. Like this could be something really, really good. And what we're kind of seeing, really, what feels like is we're seeing the first Final Fantasy since really 11 to release that didn't have some major problem or hurdle, in its development cycle, because 12 went through dev hell, 13 went through dev hell, 14 went through dev hell, 15 went through dev hell, and here we are at 16 now. And this one actually seemed like it went pretty well. And I think it kind of it shows and reflects well too in the game. Like it feels like a very consistently, this is the vision and this is what it wants to do, and then it just executes. So without further ado, let's get into it. Final Fantasy 16, what it is and what it is not. It is absolutely a fantasy-based game, and I mean like hard fantasy. This is medieval fantasy, like leather armor, straps, iron bucklers, swords, and shields. Like this, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of fantastical elements, but there's no sort of bending like time eras. There's no like, oh, does it have like Magitech armor? Does it have like fantasy mechs or from what we saw, definitely not. This is a game that's very obviously inspired by more popular recent entries in fantasy genre, and yeah, I'm just going to come out right out and say it. Game of Thrones, because just going by the opening alone, the dialogue is very different from traditional Final Fantasies, from a lot of other Japanese-style RPGs. It's not that it necessarily is going for a Western bent, but it definitely is going for more... The way the cinematics are going is definitely going for something that feels more in line with something like a high-quality, streaming series or what have you. The first thing you'll probably notice dialogue-wise is there is a lot of F-bombs in this game. This is not your teenage years Final Fantasy. They're going for a hard M on this, and they're not shy about it. And they kind of make that known pretty well known right away. Not only are you gonna see a lot of F-bombs, you're gonna see a lot of political intrigue, a lot of characters kind of sleeping around for political advantage and stuff. Nothing gratuitous, but just sort of like they're not shying away from it at all. Like this is not the sort of like, oh, or will they, won't they hold hands. It's like, nope. This is definitely inspired by the more R-rated, mature rated style of fantasy that's kind of popularized over the last few years and what have you. But we're introduced early on to basically the main character Clive going on what feels like a suicide mission in the middle of a big giant battle between icons, which are obviously like they're the summons from old Final Fantasies, as you probably already know. Certain characters in the world of Final Fantasy 16, there are certain people who have the ability to transform into giant kaiju-sized versions of these summons and do battle, or whatever they need to do. And Clive is with a group of other, we don't really know if they're mercenaries, more like spec ops people, and they're on a mission and they have to go and sneak in the midst of a giant battle. During that, we then do get to a flashback where we go back to Clive in his youth, in his teenage years, in his this is for the Japanese audience section of the game, young pretty Clive. um and one thing I will say is, like, even though there is like a little tiny bit of snippet of like gameplay, like here's how the controls, here's how to move, here's how to jump, whatever. um I will say that it is still a very cinematic, cutscene heavy game. It is actually a pretty good chunk of time before you actually have like real full control of Clive, and like really long, even longer than that, till you're like, okay, well now you're in an area of the game world where like I'm just controlling him and attacking things at random at will. So yeah, just be prepared, get good and comfy, because the beginning of this game is not short. You're not jumping into the action right away. Like they set the stage. But the thing I think will be noticed immediately is the production value is exceedingly high. Like now I will say, with the caveat of like, is this a super graphically impressive game? Yes and no. Like the character animation is very impressive. Um but like, is it the highest fidelity thing? Probably not, but it's still very good. It's definitely feels like it's running on something, an engine the development studio is familiar with, but it does look good. I want to stress it looks good. But it's probably not gonna, like, it's not pushing, say, like, facial capture or mocap. Well, maybe it is, who knows? But like, yeah, it's a good looking game, but it does. I'll just come out and say it. It kind of does feel like they're running like a higher end version of Final Fantasy 14, in a good way. But yeah, anyway, so it's a long while before you actually have full control over Clive, and the first thing you do is basically to get a sort of, I need you to go check on something for me. You go to this like abandoned village in a swamp, to deal with some goblins and some other things there that have been sighted, and so that's like your first real sort of taste test of the actual gameplay. I don't really want to get too much into story segment stuff. I'll try to be as vague as possible, just because, hey, you know let you guys experience this when it comes out. I don't want to like do like, we played so much of this game that I don't really want to do a full breakdown of everything that was happening moment to moment cinematically, because that's a lot, and it's a lot of the game that you probably should just experience yourself. So anyways, when you're on this first mission, you're going to immediately notice a couple of things. One, you only control Clive. You do have a dog companion, and you can issue orders to the dog companion. But yes, this is a game where you control one character. I think that's for the best. Again, this is a very Devil May Cry light style battle. If you were kind of hoping that there was some sort of like merger or combination between, like, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake, where that was like, it's definitely real time, but it has sort of like some sort of semblance of old RPG elements, you might want to put that away, because here's the real weird, shocking thing about Final Fantasy 16. It's actually very light on RPG elements. There's like three. You equip a sword, you equip like, I believe a breastplate, or like a chest piece, and there's like, and you equip accessories. That's kind of it. Like, you have very minimal like things that you equip, and there's not really there is a spell system, but like, spells are done through the use of icons. So what I mean is, like, it's not something like the materia system, right? It's not something like, oh, I'm gonna grind out this ability. You earn XP, and the XP you earn, you go into like a skill tree, and you unlock basically more moves for the move set of the icon you have currently equipped. This is an action game. This is a character action game in the style of something like Devil May Cry. It is not as in depth as Devil May Cry, but it does have a lot of similar things. You have Head Stomp, or High Time. You have Helm Breaker. You have a Stinger. The one thing that did kind of get me is that you do initially, from your first loadout, you have a launcher, but it is a cooldown move. So when you're playing the game, the square and triangle button are icon specific moves, which basically means like whichever icon you can cycle through with the press of a shoulder button. They change what your top two buttons can do. You always have you always have a basic attack. You always have a basic jump. Um, but maybe it was, I might be misremembering it, but it might have been triangle and circle rather than square and circle. Either way, because I think square is always just default sword attack. Either way, you have an attack button. But here's the thing: you don't have a light and heavy attack, which is kind of where it really kind of differentiates itself from Devil May Cry, but it also kind of simplifies it a little bit because all the icon specific moves have cooldowns. So you can't just keep throwing stuff out willy nilly, which can be a little bit to wrap your head around. It's not. I never found it like restrictive or anything, but there were times where I really wish I could manually launch a character without having to resort to a cooldown. But either way, once you start unlocking stuff like Stinger and Helmbreaker, which by the way they have different names, but I'm just using the Devil May Cry terminology because that's what it is and that's what you're gonna know by it. Things will become real familiar real easily. And again, if you've seen in the footage, there's two. You actually both have a perfect dodge or a witch time style dodge, and a parry. Now let me just say this: the parry feels great. You can cancel out of attacks into parry, or I'm sorry, dodge. Dodge feels great. Cancel out of attacks into dodging, real easy, real fast. There is a parry, but the parry is not necessarily, it's not hitting the attack on the exact moment the enemy hits you. It's you hit the enemy right before the enemy executes their attack. So the parry system in this game, while very good, is not something you can just sort of count on to just sort of throw out there, because even the most basic quickest attack that Clive has, it has startup, it has warm up. You're not going to be like frame one pairing people. It's just not how it works, and it's not how it's really meant to work. It's almost easier to use Stinger to do parries, but again, you're going to be using the dodge, which acts a lot like Bayonetta's Witch Time dodge a whole lot, because if you get a perfect dodge off, you get a quick little time freeze, you wail on the enemy from there, you go and you have a good time, you've beaten them up. And then you also have like icon specific like special moves where you hold down a shoulder button and you get like these big time moves, which could be anything from like spiraling upwards, big jump up moves, big AoE moves. That's where like a lot of like your big stuff is there. So what the big thing that you do in this game is you stagger enemies. You beat them up and they have a little meter that grows under their life bar. And when that meter fills up, the yellow meter fills up, they get staggered. And when they're staggered, they're stunned. And that's the best perfect time to save your big heavy moves with the longest cooldown to do them. So it kind of it can lead to some really fun, intense fights. And again, the one thing I had to notice that was true of all character action games, the absolute most fun fights in this game always tended to be against the most humanoid characters. Any characters that was just like you, fighting with a melee weapon like you, these tended to be the best fights. And when an enemy started to take up and fly around in the air, it wasn't as fun. You do get like some really like basic like magic attacks, like you can just throw fireballs, like kind of like their guns in Devil May Cry, but not really the same thing. One of the big issues is the game doesn't really have the same control mapping, like the way like you can't like launch an enemy and just sort of like I guess you kind of could, but like it doesn't function the same way. Like the fireball throwing does not really function the same way as like say the guns in Devil May Cry, but it's like a lighter version of it. It's kind of something you can just kind of use to sort of pick off an enemy from a distance if they're running away or backing off too much. But again, it's all about go in there, get close in, beat stuff up. One of the early bosses or mid bosses, I guess you could say, is there's these big goblin commanders, and then there's a Marlboro. I think his name actually changed, probably for copyright reasons. But it's actually a really fun fight. It's all about seeing what the enemy's doing, dodging out of the way. There's a really fun mechanic I just kind of want to bring up real quick here, is that the Goblin Commander will do like a big Link style swing attack where he just swings it like a tornado over and over again, and you can literally dodge it each time he's swinging his sword around you. You dodge out, dodge back, attack, dodge back, attack, dodge back, attack, dodge back. Like you basically get in this rhythm, and you just start walloping this thing. Like You can see what his move's coming, see what he's doing, and you just kind of like perfect dodge each time the spin comes around, and you just start like wailing on him. You build up that stagger meter real hard, and then you beat the crap out of him. It feels great. It feels great. Like, that is my first and probably biggest takeaway from this game right now, is that combat feels great. It doesn't feel as in depth as Devil May Cry, but it does feel great. Okay, so moving on from that, again, we played a lot of young Clive, and then we did a little bit of a time skip. We came out of our flashback, and then we went into something a little bit later, and we kind of got introduced to some of the core gameplay mechanics, namely being that you have a hub and hub base, if you will, and sort of how world map progression goes. Now, to be blunt, this game does not have an open world. This game is, you pick points on a map and you load into that area. Interestingly enough, there was even stuff where you can replay segments of a game. For example, we went into a forest area and we just needed to get to the other side because we were trying to get from point A to B in the story. Once we got to the end of that forest area, beat the boss at the end of it, we literally unlocked an ability in the hub to go back and, hey, you can replay this in the arcade stage. So the game actually takes fragments of the story mode of the main quest line of it, and puts them into stages that you can replay and try to earn a higher score, a la Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. The hub world kind of functions a lot like the way Elden Ring's kind of hub functions. You have this central area you can warp back to kind of at any point. This is where your shop is. This is where your blacksmith is. This is where you have a tutorial arena. You have like a sort of fighting arena where you can practice fighting enemies and practice combos and do all this stuff just sort of without worrying about draining resources or anything like that. Um, it's all very cool, but yeah, again, just to be sort of like open and out there, it's not kind of like a traditional RPG where it's like go to town, find, town has issue, solve the issue, go to the dungeon, or the cave or whatever next to the town, solve that crisis, and then you journey to the next town. No, it's kind of like, here's this hub world that you go to, like, you go back to your home base and you do missions from your home base. Like whether they be side quests or whether they be main quest lines, that progress out from there. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit, again, you could call it kind of streamlined, but they do make sense of it in the story, and I don't want to like get like too much into it. But there's obviously a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of like, oh, this character is dead. This character might be alive. Like, this character survived, kind of thing. Stuff like that. Like this character. Like, there's also they do pull a little bit of like, you're aware as the player, like, you're aware of story beats before Clive is aware of them, and that can be interesting. It's kind of interesting also seeing how like some characters you discovered they have past history with other people you meet that you may not have known about till the two characters meet up in person in game, and that kind of leads to some interesting things. We also did get to sample, of course, the icon battles, which is like the big kaiju fights, and they vary a little bit, between fight to fight. Sometimes, you're doing things that are like Panzer Dragoon style. Sometimes you're doing things that are very, very much Asura's Wrath. It's better than Asura's Wrath. There's a lot of this game that feels like Asura's Wrath, especially with like the boss fights. Only instead of just sort of like mashing a button just to build a meter like mindlessly, this game requires a lot of finesse and skill, and then you stagger them, you beat them up, and then when you get a boss down to a certain point, and then you do something fucking big, over the top, and really cool, like in Asura's Wrath. It's like Asura's Wrath with gameplay, in a lot of ways. If that doesn't get you hyped for the game, I don't know what will, necessarily. So that was pretty cool. So we did get to sample a couple different like icon fights, both like we even got to fight, as a human and then as an icon. So that was pretty cool to see. And then I think the last thing we got to do was we actually got to run around in one of the larger open field areas, because this was kind of something a lot of people kind of started to wonder, because it's a character-driven action game, because it's like sort of just pick a point on a map and it loads into there. Does this game just like not have an overworld? Does it not have large areas? And they were pretty adamant about it was either GDC or PAX. I think it was PAX, where they were like, no, we have open areas. Now I want to stress this. It looks very, very good. It is, in actuality, the actual physical space Clive can run around in these open areas, at least the one we previewed, is not that much. It just is designed well and looks like it's this big open area, but like Clive kind of has, Kratos problems where he can't walk through puddles of water, like any sort of water barrier, that anything deeper than ankle high he can't cross. There's like the trees. There are certain trees and bushes that are just hard walls. Like he just won't even go through them. So you'll discover that like as much as nice as some of these bigger open areas look, they're actually deceptively. They don't actually take that long to run across. They're very tiny in comparison. Like if you're like me, like oh you're this guy who plays a lot of Xenoblade, this is gonna feel it's going to feel tiny in comparison to say some of the giant open fields of that. That being said, it's not really a game it's really not meant for that. This is not a game meant for. Now there does seem to be, I'm going off of not anything I saw here, but just going off of footage we saw from PAX and whatever. It does look like there will be areas that are even larger than the ones we had. I think there's probably going to be chocobo riding at some point. I'm guessing. I think that was maybe in PAX footage. So there's definitely going to be larger areas than what we saw, but the open field-ish area we got to preview, it was definitely obviously it was a huge step up from say going through the swamp for the abandoned village or going through like the sort of suicide mission in the canyons at the very beginning. It was definitely bigger than those, but it is still a very sort of tight knit experience. Like you're just not going to be roaming around stuff. You're not going to be climbing on top of stuff. You're not going to be going through stuff. Clive has no ability to swim. So yeah, it's a little it's a little like jarring if you were kind of expecting there to be like a big giant open roaming field, like say from 14. You're not quite getting that here. Um, and then other areas like the aforementioned forests and swamps, they're very tightly knit, driven experiences like a Devil May Cry game to sort of guide you from enemy encounter to enemy encounter and kind of mixing it up each new step of the way. Very well done in that sense. Now, here's like, if I had any real sort of complaints with it, is that the dog companion's a little hard because you have hotkeys on the D-pad, which are for potions, high potions, like buff potions, but you have to literally like tab out of that, swap it out to dog commands to use the dog. And the dog is also not necessarily. Sometimes you have to like tell him to like attack an enemy multiple times before he does it. He has like a very tiny heal move. It's barely useful. What we found actually interesting is that there are certain accessories in the game for accessibility purposes where you have things to make the game super easy by equipping certain items. One of the big ones was you can equip a ring where you don't have to perfect dodge, because right before you get hit, the game actually freezes and you see an R1 prompt come up on the screen, and it's got a little dial that quickly drains. All you have to do is when the game freezes and you see R1 flash, you hit R1 and you dodge out of the way of the enemy's attack. Like it basically stops the game letting you from getting hit all the time. That's like for super easy mode. Now, I didn't use that. I once we played one of the demos and it was on automatically and immediately de-equipped it. But we did find, me and Max also kind of agreed. We found something where there's a ring that lets the dog basically do all of its own. Will the AI for the dog will basically do whatever the best thing, in the moment. Like it just sort of like auto runs the dog, so you don't have to. I honestly found this ring super useful. I found the dog a little bit more trouble than it was worth to try to get commands out of it, and I might even just play the whole game all the way through with having the dog auto command ring on. It just really helped. Um, I don't believe these rings take up any um, slots that you would say necessarily use for just like stat boost or whatever. Don't quote me on that. That may not be true, but they're pretty much just there to sort of like equip or unequip like easy modes for the game. And I thought it was actually kind of a really clever way to sort of deal with the fact that like, yeah, some people, especially people with like disabled gamers or whatever, they may not have like these stupid crazy action game and fighting game reaction times. So having a ring that basically like gives you a nice prompt, for when to actually dodge rather than like just hoping like you're reacting on movement. I actually think it's really cool. It's really well done. It's a really good feature. Um, that being said, like overall, then as for the rest of the game, plays wise, I like everything I see so far. I will say, if anything's a little bit of a party pooper, a little bit, just because we're so close to release. Um, The lighting in the game is a little flat. It gets real hard to see things at dark. This could have been entirely down to the TV screens we were playing, but we tried to adjust it as best we could. And there's plenty of options in game to adjust brightness and gamma settings and what have you. But I will say, like in general, like the game looks really good a lot of the time, and then sometimes, like especially in the hideout, you'll be like, "Man, the gliding's pretty flat here." Um, but it's definitely a game that feels confident. It feels like it knows what it wants to be. It doesn't have any. It's not trying to go. It's interesting because it doesn't feel like it's trying to go for anything too crazy, even though it actually is, because it literally is taking a Devil May Cry light style combat and putting it into a quote unquote Final Fantasy title. So it is doing something crazy, but at the same time, it also feels like no, it's just doing what you naturally expect something like this to do. Um, Again, I came away just as impressed, as I wanted to be with the game. The only sort of thing that was maybe not quite as was like, okay, so there really isn't a lot of RPG elements to it. If you were hoping to dick around in a menu and dick around with stats and stat modifiers and grow things and do all kinds of hoodly doodly doodads, and all kinds of equipping, all kinds of multiple different things, it's going to like increase 1 percentage point of a stat. No, this is a game where it's about it's skill based. It's just about reaction and timing and everything like that. There is a leveling system, and you probably will get stomped. If you're trying to fight things that are too high level for you, because like in the open field area, you could fight some of the buffer enemies, and yeah, they could wallop you, man. Like unless you were like the most perfect dodger in the world, you're gonna die real quickly to some stuff. So there is a leveling system. It's not like you can just kill everything at level 1, but this is very much an action oriented game. It's got a very mature storyline. It's got gore, it's got f bombs, it's got sex. um but it's not any more gratuitous than you would see, in any sort of streaming series on TV today. It's not trying to be edgy about it. It's just trying to be just sort of more gritty and grounded. Well, as gritty and grounded as a game that features giant kaiju battles can be. If you, so, I mean, even Lord of the Rings had a Balrog fight. So, take that as you will. Am I excited for this game? Absolutely. And I'm really happy, to have been able to participate in this and play it. And yeah, my faith in this game has just been mostly solidified for the most part. But I'm really curious and hoping to see that there's even more moves later on in the basically in the unlock tree, the skill tree for each icon, because each icon has its own skill tree, and it was real easy to max out the first one. Didn't seem like it took that long at all, but I'm hoping that lots of other moves come into play later on with the other skill trees. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of the game and what you think of my impressions, and I will see you on the channel later, dudes.